Oral questions by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, for weeks now, we have been asking the Premier to respond for a request for funding to support hockey teams in British Columbia. In fact, we know they will not survive. We are very thankful that there is a return to play in process, but there will be no crowds in the stands. The Premier had this to say, and I quote, "We need to make sure we provide the resources to keep these organizations going until they can get back on their feet," end quote. Well, the Premier knows that these organizations desperately need help. In fact, he said help was on the way, and yet they are still waiting. So today, can the Premier tell those teams and other organizations when exactly they will get the badly needed funding that they have asked for?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for her question. I know her passion for this subject, and I share it. We were delighted to announce the news that the Public Health Office, Dr. Brian Emerson and Dr. Henry had worked through the details of putting in place pods so that the BC Junior Hockey League could have an abbreviated season. We're also mindful of the fiscal challenges that not just the BCHL, the WHL, and a host of other significant sporting organizations, whether it be the Western Lacrosse Association, the junior football, any number of those community-driven initiatives that depend on getting people in seats. They depend on business sponsorships, which have been maintained in many instances, but even those businesses are questioning the investment in an organization that may not be there next year. So we absolutely understand this. We're working through the processes of government, which the member knows very, very well. First order of business was to get the kids back on the ice. Second order of business is to make sure that the teams, the franchise, that are not all for-profit businesses, as she knows. Many of them are community-driven, and many of them are not-for-profits, and we need to make sure that we try and find the type of program that will meet the needs of all of the franchise, not just those that are businesses.
Leader of the Official Opposition on supplemental.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to the Premier. And we certainly know that there was a lot of celebrating in British Columbia when the return to play was granted, and people are very appreciative of that. So yesterday, we asked about the status of the funding request, and the Minister of Jobs replied, and I quote, "There are grants available for sports teams to apply for," end quote. But as the Premier just pointed out, and he knows well, BC Hockey League teams like the Prince George Spruce Kings, the Powell River Kings, the Merritt Centennials are non-profit organizations. And the Premier himself pointed that out. So what does that mean? It means that yesterday, while the Jobs Minister was busy touting an application, they are ineligible for that minister's grant program. Ineligible. And yet he stood in this House and said to everyone, well, they can just apply. Actually, the Premier may want to know that the Minister of Jobs apparently doesn't know what's going on in his own grant program, which just points out the fact that that program has been botched and bungled since the day it was announced. Another example, just another example of that. So, you know, the members can mutter all they want on the other side, but here's what the Jobs Minister said yesterday. Let's just let those sports teams apply. Well, sadly, the minister doesn't know what's going on in his own ministry, and the Premier needs to clarify for the record today. He can either clarify the Jobs Minister's comments, or he can today stand up and specifically tell us what grant program that non-profit organizations like the BC Hockey League, like the PNE, like festivals across British Columbia, where exactly can they apply for the money that the Jobs Minister touted yesterday?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, I think the Leader of the Opposition answered her own question, and I said in my response to her first question that there are not the same apples in this basket. There are apples, there are orange, there are pears. The member knows this full well, as does the minister responsible. Those franchise that are for-profit businesses, should apply for the grants that are available to them. What I said in my response to her, and which I think was abundantly clear yesterday, is there are other franchise operations that are not. for-profit businesses. And that will require a different tool, a different solution to the challenge. We want to make sure that all of the franchise have access to the resources that they will need. We want to make sure it's fair and it's equitable. Those that are for-profit businesses have programs that they should have already applied to, and those that are not, we'll see what the balance is at the end of the day, and we'll make sure that they're kept whole as well. That's the objective, Honourable Speaker. And again, one of the challenges I think the opposition is having is they can't take yes for an answer. They can't take yes for an answer. We understand the challenges. We understand the challenges. These programs did not exist 12 months ago. They did not exist 12 months ago. Not everyone is the same, and that's why we need to make sure that we do this in an equitable way that ensures that the franchise in Merritt gets the same access to dollars as the franchise in Penticton.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Only in NDP land would it make sense to tell organizations to go and apply for a grant program which they're not eligible for. And with all due respect to the Premier, he is likely hearing from the same organizations that we are, not to mention countless businesses around this province that have been waiting for almost a year now for support from this government. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we asked what kinds of supports nonprofit organizations like Science World and the Vancouver Aquarium and others could expect. The minister responsible replied, and I quote, well, I'm a member of Science World, end quote. Well, Mr. Speaker, Science World is going to need more than $130 out of the minister's pocket in order to keep their lights on. So my question to the minister is this: is $130 the level of funding that he believes organizations like Science World and the Vancouver Aquarium need to survive? Or is he prepared to step up today, not 2 days from now, not 30 days from now, God help us, not 6 months from now, but today, and provide the funding for organizations that need the support now?
Minister of Jobs and Economic Recovery.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And clearly, 99.4% of jobs returning to BC is really bothering the opposition members over here. The highest per capita supports for businesses and people in all of Canada. I don't understand why they're so angry at the success that we collectively are having here in British Columbia, Honourable Speaker. I shared with the members that there are some businesses, some sports teams that operate like businesses. They've applied, and some have already received the money. As the Premier has noted, some of them are not-for-profits. And I've said yesterday as well, the Minister of Tourism and Arts Culture has continued to engage with them to find solutions for the not-for-profits. But the sports organizations that are running like businesses have applied, and some have actually received the money. So the opposition leader will be pleased to hear that. That being said, today we expanded Launch Online program, Honourable Speaker. Fantastic program. We had put $12 million towards that. Originally, we said such an increase in demand. We increased it by $30 million today, Honourable Speaker. And I know the member for Kamloops, when it was announced, said, oh, this is not needed. That was his position. This is not needed. And so, Honourable Speaker, just as we are adapting our programs to adjust to the needs of businesses throughout BC, it's nice to see that the member is adjusting his views on the needs of programs in BC as well.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson on supplemental.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm not the one that is expressing the anger about it taking a year for this government to deliver programs. It's small businesses, it's mid-sized businesses, it's non-profit organizations, it's organizations like Science World and the Vancouver Aquarium, rodeos, all kinds of organizations that are waiting and waiting and waiting for this government to deliver. Mr. Speaker, the only thing that's comprehensive about the minister's recovery program is how how bungled and how comprehensive his bungling of this program actually is. That's the reality. The minister also claimed yesterday that there was money available for theatres. Made a big deal about this yesterday. Theatres can apply to a program to build infrastructure, but newsflash to the minister: the program is closed. It's closed. It's not taking applications anymore. So there's no money left for performing arts organizations. But Mr. Speaker, that same program had enough money to give the City of Vancouver $645,000 to build a toilet. So now, we all agree on the importance of public washrooms, Mr. Speaker, but $645,000 for a toilet, is it gold-plated? So my question to the minister would be this: why was spending over $500,000 on a toilet more important than grants for struggling performing arts venues that are barely hanging on?
Minister of Jobs and Economic
Thank you,
Recovery.
Honourable Speaker, and the member may want to reach out to the Theatre and Trail, which is delighted to have the dollars available to continue to operate their business. Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, I've already highlighted and
Members, let's listen to the answer.
The twins from Kamloops might want to hear the answer to this, Honourable Speaker.
Okay. Let me know when you're done.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
I'll
let them decide who Danny DeVito is. Honourable Speaker, we have the highest per capita supports in all of Canada for business and people. Honourable Speaker, we're so proud of that. 99.4% of jobs returned, 10 straight months of job increase, leading the country. Honourable Speaker, this is something we should all be proud of. Honourable Speaker, we've cut property taxes, deferred others to reduce pressure. We've prohibited commercial evictions. We've put in tax subsidies for businesses to hire and rehire employees. We've provided a 25% reduction to liquor pricing for restaurants. And guess what? We made it permanent going forward. We're allowing restaurants to be able to sell liquor, which they've been asking for a long time. Honourable Speaker, we've made so many adjustments to our programs. We've made so much support available. That's why we're having success in BC right now, Honourable Speaker, and we're well positioned to have a very strong economic recovery.
Leader of Third Party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I believe we are all in agreement in this House that building a new paradigm in this province must be done. A new paradigm for forest management in this province must be done in full partnership with Indigenous peoples. Part of this is recognizing the fact that the status quo of old-growth logging is currently happening without the consent of many Indigenous peoples in our province. I'd like to quote Dorothy Hunt, Chief in Council, Quagioth First Nation, who has some very powerful words to say about what's happening in her territory. Quote, "The Quagioth First Nation is not opposed to logging, but we have had a ban on old-growth logging in our territory for over 10 years. Yet new logging approvals continue to move forward without meaningful consultation and consent. We asked this government for deferrals in all remaining old-growth in our territory more than 5 months ago. And yet we still see new old-growth logging being approved in our salmon-bearing watersheds. Recently, Western Forest Products logged right into our salmon-spawning rivers. Through you, Honourable Speaker, to the Minister of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, Quagioth Nation would like to know, will the Minister give a directive to Western Forest Products and regional district staff to stop violating our rights, title, and Douglas Treaty and defer old-growth logging so that we can begin having much-needed government-to-government conversations?"
Minister of Forests, Land and Natural Resource Operations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And our government is strongly committed to implementing the 14 recommendations from the Old Growth Report. And the first report, of course, is to engage the full involvement of Indigenous leaders and organizations. And our ministry is doing that. And I would be happy to reach out to the member and to the leader, to the chief, and talk to them about their issues, because we know how important this work is. The number one recommendation from the report is one that we take very seriously, and it is to engage the full involvement of Indigenous leaders, and I would be happy to talk to them about this.
Member for North, the third Leader of Third Party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I guess I'm struggling with what strongly committed to the recommendations really means coming from this minister and this government, given that we've missed the first important deadline on deferrals of old growth that need protection, and now we're hearing from Indigenous communities that have indeed not been consulted with. This is Chief Randy Cook, Makwala of the Ma'amtagila First Nation. He says, and I quote, "Collaboration between First Nations governments will be key to moving forward. BC timber sales continues to high-grade and target ancient, culturally significant red and yellow cedar old growth forests in Ma'amtagila territory in both the Great Bear Rainforest and on Vancouver Island." He has a question, Honourable Speaker, to the Minister of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations. He asks, will the minister tell BC timber sales to cease all logging of old-growth forests to show that BC is a leader in ending the unethical practice of old-growth logging? And please, could you start with my territory, where BC timber sales and companies like Lamar Lake Logging are destroying culturally modified trees and the last of our sacred trees of life, the great cedar tree?
Minister of Forests.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there are thousands of hectares, excuse me, of protected old-growth trees across BC. There's in Clayoquot Sound, there's 170,000 hectares. Crystalline Creek, there's over 9,900 hectares. There's almost 600 hectares in Quissam. In Compaloo Valley has 5,000 hectares, and I could go on. There are hundreds of thousands of hectares of old-growth forests that have been protected, and we are committed to working with Indigenous governments on additional areas of old growth deferrals and protections. All of the protections, all of the deferrals that were done in September were done with direct consultation, with direct discussions to government with Indigenous governments. And we will have also protected old growth trees through Together for Wildlife and modernized land use plans. And we continue to defer logging to support the caribou conservation work, which was done in consultation and support of Indigenous nations, protection for spotted owls, again in consultation with Indigenous nations, and protecting the marble murrelet and northern goshawk recovery plans. Mr. Speaker, paradigm shifts take time. And we will work with all our partners, including the government-to-government discussions with Indigenous nations, to make sure that we get this right.
Member for North Saanich and Islands.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what's clear by the Minister of Forests' response is that they're getting it wrong. They're getting it wrong because you can't consult about trees that are already cut. And the minister, when asked a direct question about an Indigenous leader, Randy Cook in North Island, starts to rattle off about other areas that are protected that are not in the territories that we're talking about. Quoting Unethical Nation Hereditary and Band Council Chief Jordan Michael, Unethical Nation is fed up with the BC government and logging companies gaslighting our people. In fact, it's hard to tell the difference between logging corporations and the government sometimes. We want to end the theft of our old growth rainforests and steward our lands in a way that benefit everyone, not just wealthy shareholders. When will the Premier, the Minister of Forests, and the Attorney General honor the rights and title of the Unethical Nation and stop prioritizing Western forest products profits over the health of the environment, wild salmon, and my people's cultural heritage in the old growth forests of Nootka Island, end quote. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. What specific steps has he taken to date in partnership with the Flynn Roar to begin to prioritize reconciliation and restore Indigenous self-determination, decision-making, and stewardship in the management of our forests?
Minister of Forests.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, we are committed to government discussions with Indigenous nations in this province as the #1 recommendation from the Old Growth Report. And I will remind the member that the Old Growth Report was written by two illustrious foresters in this province, Al Gorley and Gary Merkel. And Gary Merkel is a member of the Tahltan Nation. And we know that we need to have done what we have done is those 14 recommendations where we deferred over thousands of hectares of old growth forest. But we also know that we did that in discussion with Indigenous nations, and we have more to do. We don't deny that. We have more to do, and we will be reaching out to Indigenous nations, and we will be reaching out to them on a government basis to discuss to have those important discussions about their land, about where the nations that want to be involved in forestry, the nations that want to be involved in tenure management and in stewardship of the land, because we recognize how critically important that is, and we are committed to doing that.
Member for Abbotsford South.
No, hey, excuse me. Mr. Speaker, I have a supplemental.
Member, go for supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think whoever's making the decisions about who's answering these questions just put Indigenous nations on notice as to the rank and file of where the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation stands in the grand scheme of things of this government. Because my question was not about forests. My question was about what the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliations has done to advance this conversation. A question specific to that minister, a ministry in which I hold to high esteem, Mr. Speaker. Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, President of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, has also called for an immediate protections to create space for proper consultation. And he said to have good faith conversations, we must, quote, put away the power saws, end quote. UBCIC has written a letter to this government explaining why adequate funding is a critical component of reconciliation and a shift away from old growth logging. I quote, with a lack of critical and accessible funding combined with the government's overwhelming influence resulting in Indigenous dependency on old growth logging jobs and revenues, First Nations communities are unable to exercise their title and rights to freely pursue their economic options consistent with the protection of old growth forests and Indigenous self-determination, end quote. To quote the letter again, quote, conservation financing is vital to support and advance sustainable economic self-determination in First Nations communities to ensure that an equivalent economic alternative to old growth logging is available for these communities, end quote. Again, my question is to the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. Has the minister, along with his counterpart in Flynn Road, brought forward a proposal for conservation financing as a central part of reconciliation and a new forestry paradigm for next month's budget?
Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I reiterate what my colleague, the minister responsible for forests and for the old growth strategy, has said. The first recommendation of that report, which was co-authored by Mr. Merkel of the Tahltan Nation, commits our government to work with Indigenous peoples. I have the greatest respect for Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, and I'm aware of the correspondence that the member refers to, and of course will continue to be involved as a member of the Executive Council in the decision-making respecting this critically important file. We are playing a supportive role across government and will continue to do so. I thank the member for his question.
Member for Abbotsford South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For over 3 years, the Premier has been fighting a legal battle to hide a list of files on his computer. The government lawyers tried every argument imaginable to suggest that providing a screenshot or a list of files was too hard and too complicated. Well, good news, the Premier lost. The Office of Information and Privacy Commissioner has dismissively ruled, quote, while human effort is required to provide a list of files, for example, the pushing of buttons and entering commands, etc., that kind of effort is an ordinary part of using a computer End quote. Here's a yes we'd love to hear. Will the Premier end the games and hand over a list of documents on his computer?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, if the member wants to see access to a computer that's rarely turned on, he's welcome to it. But it's the constant fishing expeditions by the official opposition, not to elevate awareness or understanding of the critical issues facing British Columbians, but to keep the people in the basement busy with the FOI requests. You can come and take a look at my computer right after question period. I'm happy to let you take all the pictures that you want.
Member for Abbotsford South on supplemental.
Government lawyers spent over 3 years delaying and blocking the information. Now they seek to defy the ruling by choosing the most difficult means possible of providing those records by applying a trumped-up fee. I have an invoice for $2,700 for an estimated 90 hours of work to produce a record. If they're going to charge us that, I shudder to what they think they would charge the press. Are the basic computer functions beyond the capabilities of the Premier or his staff? Is nothing more than an attempt to block access. Mr. Speaker, what is the Premier hiding on his computer?
Premier.
Well, thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I think it was a tactical move by the official opposition to put up a rookie MLA because the schedule that he refers to was not created by me. It was not created by the Attorney General. It was created by the BC Liberals. In fact, it was approved by the former finance minister who proudly said, "I don't use emails." So if the member on the other side has a concern with the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, it is under review right now. There are members of the official opposition, I believe, that are on the committee. I'm hopeful that they are. And if they want to improve the public's access to information that will help them make determinations about the well-being of their families, the support in their communities, how we can help businesses, 100% behind you, my friend. But if you just want to look at what I'm listening to on YouTube, you can come and look at that right after question period.
Member for Kootenay East.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sticking with the St. Patrick's Day theme, it's going to take a lot more than the luck of the Irish to allow the Premier to wiggle out of this one. This is what the Premier said 3 years ago, and I quote, "I set a very high standard. I am disappointed that we are not always meeting that standard, but I remain committed to ensuring that we're doing our level best, to be open, to be transparent, and to have the best practices when it comes to freedom of information," end quote. Yet time and time again, this NDP government has blocked access to information to the opposition, the public, and the media. Huge fees to block access, endless extensions for even the simplest of requests, and even going so far as to defy legislative deadlines for FOI requests. Why is the Premier using trumped-up fees to avoid providing information?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And again, it's good, although a more seasoned member asking the questions, he wasn't here at the time that the former finance minister declined to use email. He wasn't here when the former Minister of Transportation perfected the triple delete strategy. He wasn't here. He wasn't here when the former Premier's office had someone responsible for freedom of information who used yellow Post-its, to track information coming in and out of the office. We are doing everything we can to meet the public's expectation about access to their information. If that does not meet the needs, of the kids in the basement that are working hard to drum up something for the people on the opposition to ask the government, that's not our problem, that's their problem.
Member for Kootenay East on supplemental.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, maybe I should snap the Premier into the now, into 2021. And this is what the Information and Privacy Commissioner had to say. He said, quote, "Between April 1st, 2017...
Let's listen to the question, please. Continue. Continue, member.
Oh, sorry. This is what the Privacy Commissioner had to say. Quote, "Between April 1st, 2017 and March 31st, 2020, government failed to comply with legislative timelines in thousands of cases, and over 900 files remain unanswered with no legal authority to delay responding," end quote. This is a deliberate attempt by the NDP to conceal government records from British Columbians. When will the Premier stop fighting the release of public information?
Minister for Citizen Services.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And I want to let the members across the way know their attempts at making this request sound so simple couldn't be the furthest from the truth. This request that was put forward requires 90 hours of staff time and will take developing 2 computer programs, designing and developing 2 computer programs to process this request. This is a broad, sweeping request that's asking for screenshots of devices, which aren't typically government records. They historically have not been under the previous government. They are not historically records that our government has kept. Over the past 3 years, there has been a 250% increase in FOI requests from political parties. Imagine that, Honourable Speaker, 250% increase from political parties that have cost the BC taxpayers $43 million. So in applying a fee of $2,700 is entirely appropriate to design and develop 2 computer programs to actually generate records that don't currently exist is an entirely appropriate use of the fee. We are being open and transparent with British Columbians. Last year, we released 1.86 million pages in responses to FOI requests, and our response time is 86% compared to the previous government's 79%. So we are going to continue to be transparent, Honourable Speaker. Thank you.
The bell ends the question period.